that survey street remarks. Second speaker, Mira Loma.
Okay.
Is everyone ready to start?
Yep.
Okay, shut that door, please. Can we shut that door back? If it's open, close it. Thank you.
As this will ask, so I want the audience to please be quiet during the debate. Thank you.
Everyone ready? Cameron and I affirm the resolution the European Union should join the Belt and Road Initiative. Our first contention is preventing pandemics. China's Belt and Road Initiative, or BRI, is China's plan to provide funding for infrastructure in cash-strapped countries who can't afford it themselves. It's critical that the BRI, as China Harvard University 2018 finds, that China plans to roll out the building of hospitals, training of doctors, and delivery of emergency health care as part of its Health Silk Road aimed at funding the healthcare system of countries. If completed, the United Nations reports in 2019 that the BRI's health ambitions will be key to preventing and containing the spread of the next deadly pandemic and contain the AIDS virus in countries, saving over 600,000 lives. This is critical, as overall 800,000 lives are affected by HIV and AIDS in the EU. It's critical to provide support for those, as well as contain the spread of these diseases. Our second contention is revitalizing the EU economy. While on the surface, Europe might appear developed, the reality is darker. Europe is near negative economic growth and has no money to spend on infrastructure after other expenditures. Indeed, Brewster Vox quantifies in 2018 that 1/3 of European municipalities reported underinvestment into infrastructure in recent years. However, McBride of the Council of Foreign Relations writes in 2019 that joining the Belt and Road Initiative would expand roads, bridges, and other public infrastructure projects across Europe, increasing levels of interconnectivity between trading partners, giving Europe the much-needed growth. The EU joining the BRI revitalizes the economy, as infrastructure is the most important asset for an economy. For example, the Center for American Progress finds that in the 1930s, Roosevelt doubled down on infrastructure policies during the Great Depression to pull the United States out of an economic slump, creating millions of jobs in both the construction and manufacturing sectors. The International Labor Organization finds that these jobs typically go to those in the lowest economic quintile. Investment into infrastructure like roads, bridges, and seaports will increase economic activity by boosting the amount of trade going through the EU. The World Bank argues because of this effect, trade would increase by 12% by decreasing travel times by 9%. They further that because trade and jobs are so important for the economy, trade alone accounts for over 63% of the purchasing power for those in the lowest economic quintile. For these reasons, Stupak of the IMF finds in 2018 that every dollar you spend on infrastructure makes back $3 in the long run. The impact is closing out poverty. The World Bank furthers in 2019 that BRI transport projects will lift up to 39 million people out of poverty. These impacts, however, would extend beyond the EU, as the EU already trades hundreds of billions of dollars with developing countries like Africa. By signing the Belt and Road Initiative, the EU not only creates new pathways to developing countries, but it will bolster the ones it already has with them. This is why the CGTN writes in 2019 that because of this effect, non-BRI countries would experience nearly 3% faster economies. Our third contention is relieving China's overcapacity of steel. Blossom Game of the University of San Diego writes in 2018 that China has an overcapacity of steel, as steel companies have overproduced and steel sits on shelves with no real demand. However, Sheng of the South China Morning Post explains in 2015 that the overcapacity is causing an economic slump as companies are defaulting on their loans with no profit to be made. If not fixed soon, these rapid loan defaults will destroy the Chinese economy and cause a recession. He finds that, quote, the situation is a ticking time bomb for China. This recession would affect the entire world, as China is involved in so many other economies. The IMF finds in 2019 that this recession would push over 900 million people into poverty. Fortunately, the EU joining the Belt and Road Initiative would solve, as Small of the GMF finds in 2018 that because infrastructure projects require tremendous amounts of steel, EU infrastructure projects would uniquely create enough steel demand to relieve China's steel overcapacity. Indeed, Watson of Brown University explains in 2017 that a 5% increase in investments can relieve China's overcapacity of steel by 22%. It is for these reasons that we strongly affirm.
Can we see the evidence that says that if the EU joins the Belt and Road, it's enough to lift out the overcapacity? Thank you. We'll start prep when they give us the evidence. one that says it's enough to lift out the overcapacity. Okay. Starting now. Okay, and then you said the second one is also saying the same thing?
Yeah.
Okay, we'll continue now. Okay. That's 10 seconds. Can I use your stand?
Yeah.
Thanks. Okay, is everyone ready? Let's vote. If it's okay with all three judges, I will be referring to the Belt and Road Initiative as the BRI, just abbreviation. Okay. Time starts now. We negate. Currently, the BRI is failing. Page 19 of the NAR writes that due to a lack of funding, BRI projects will have to be reassessed and some will have to be curtailed or abandoned altogether. The World Bank in 2018 explains that currently, more than half of the funding for BRI projects is coming from China's big four banks. Zhao 19 of Wharton furthers that BRI lending by major Chinese banks has dropped 89% since 2015, and lending by commercial banks has ceased almost entirely. The EU can save the BRI by increasing direct funding. Garcia Herrero in 2017 explains that China cannot financially manage such an ambitious project on its own, furthering that if the EU joined, the BRI could be financed. She furthers that EU-based institutions are already the largest lenders to countries that they have agreements with, and joining the BRI is only a matter of accelerating that trend. This means that affirming saves the BRI from collapse. However, saving the BRI from collapse is bad because the BRI hurts the environment. Currently, the global coal industry is phasing out. Carrington just last month explained that total investment into coal plants has fallen 75% in past years. Fortunately, this translates to an increase in the use of renewable energy, decreasing emissions, and Irina in 2017 quantifies that by 2050, renewables can decrease carbon emissions by 70%. Unfortunately, the BRI reverses the trend towards renewables. Subpoint A is coal. China faces extreme coal oversupply. Smith 19 explains that there is a glut of supply in the Chinese market and their coal supply hasn't been this high in 4 years. Although China has this excess of coal, because the world is moving towards renewable energy, the demand for their coal has plummeted. However, through the BRI, China builds coal plants in developing countries to raise demand for their coal by creating coal plants. Because China can't fund these coal plants right now, the EU joining is the only way that they would be built, as they would participate financially. Problematically, Ewing 19 of the Hill explains that through the BRI, China is exporting its surplus of coal equipment and technology, which undermines the global push to phase out coal. As a result, Perry of the Conversation explains that countries become locked into coal because corporate lobbying and government-backed financing ensures that solely coal-based infrastructure is used. Empirically, Inskeep in 2019 quantifies that every single coal plant built commits the recipient nation to 50 years of use. Overall, Nakano 2019 finds that over 90% of all the BRI's energy investments go into coal. Thus, Tabuchi 17 of the New York Times finds that 1,600 coal plants are planned in 62 countries that are part of the BRI. The reason why negating is crucial is because Brown in 2019 of the Institute for Energy Economics finds that these deals can still be canceled. If the BRI collapses, which only happens on the negation, countries would indefinitely revert back to renewables. And that is because Mardell 19 of Foreign Policy explains that before the BRI, during the BRI, China was these only countries' options for coal, meaning that if there was no China, these countries would be using renewables. Subpoint B is on infrastructure. Zhang of Science magazine finds that the construction of infrastructure will require substantial energy consumption. These needs will likely be met with fossil fuels given the lack of renewable energy in many BRI countries. Thus, Zedek 19 concludes that even if the best practices are kept in place, BRI countries will be the single largest producers of carbon worldwide by 2050, producing 50% of the world's CO2. The impact of carbon emissions is lives. Hicks 19 writes that if the coal plan China plans to execute via the BRI completes to its full scale, the world would warm as much as 3 degrees Celsius. This is really bad, as Profeta, the National Geographic in 2018 concludes that preventing just a 0.5 degree rise in temperature Celsius would save 153 million lives. Thus, we negate. Alright, you ready for cross?
Yeah. Can I have the first question?
Go ahead.
Everyone good? So, at the top, you say that there's a funding gap. If
Right.
we prove there isn't, or that the BRI will still sustain, does your whole case go away?
Like, we would say that insofar as we can debate whether there's a funding gap or not, but sure, if you can prove to me there is no funding gap that was ever posed to the BRI, sure. Can I ask you a question?
So if we win the observation, at the top of your case, like there's not a funding gap, there's still gonna be coal in developing countries no matter what, and that means your whole case goes away, correct?
Sure, but we'll debate whether there's a funding gap. Alright, let's talk about the health Silk Road. You tell me that a lot of hospitals are gonna be built across the world, right?
Yeah.
So for example, if the BRI came to Ethiopia, even if you built 5,000 hospitals in Ethiopia, where are the doctors for these hospitals coming from?
China, that are trained doctors to help people.
Okay, I'd like to see a piece of evidence that China has enough doctors to ship everywhere across the world and that they would be willing to do so.
I
You
mean,
can
they
take a
have
question.
them. Okay. So let's talk about coal, right? So are countries going to accept what's the cheaper option as their energy source?
I mean, one, we would say that coal is cheaper, but two, even if you can prove that renewable
Wait, it's a
energy,
yes
hold
or no
on.
question. It was a yes or no question.
There's more nuance to just yes or no, okay? We tell you that A, coal's cheaper. B, even if you want to debate that it's not, these countries are literally locked into coal because when China goes to these countries, they build coal plants, which locks their economies into using coal plants and coal-based
You have to win
infrastructure.
that they build coal. So my question
that's pretty
is,
obvious.
yes, wait, but we're going to contest that, obviously. So my question is, are countries going to accept what's a cheaper option for them?
No, because it depends, A, what China is going to give them, and B, what is cheaper. There's
So-
two sets of what they have to consider.
So if I'm Ethiopia and
Right.
I'm trying to accept energy investment, I'm going to be like, no, I'm going to take what's more expensive for me.
But if China is building a coal plant in my nation, I'm not going to use solar energy in a coal plant. That doesn't make any
So what
sense.
we're going to argue is that
You
renewable
can
energy-
argue this in your rebuttal.
Sure,
Like,
but
this is
I'm
time for
just
questions.
trying to explain the warrant.
You've made your
Like,
point that
is
what
the-
you're going for in your next speech is going to be that
Is
renewable
the
energy is
warranty-
cheaper. Can I ask you a question?
Okay, sure.
All right, you talk to me about how China's overcapacity is going to cause the entire global economy to recess. You tell me that the EU joining the BRI can probably save China's overcapacity. Where in the evidence of the two cards that you showed me does it say that it's actually going to do
The
that?
small evidence indicates that it creates more demand and solves
Okay.
for their overcapacity, and the Watson
Your-
evidence is the warranting
the
that
evidence-
5% increase in investments relieves the overcapacity.
Here's my problem with your evidence.
I
The
mean,
evidence
that's
that,
what
that
like,
no,
they
the
can
evidence,
hold on. I'm gonna ask a question.
Hold on. This is really important because the evidence that you showed me, nowhere in there does it say that if the EU joins, it can be solved. It just says it goes down. I mean, even if I agree with you that it goes down, until you prove to me that it solves, I don't see the impact
If
on
it
the
goes
outcome.
down, if it goes down, they don't have to keep.
Okay, well,
I'm gonna ask you a question.
if the US gets $100, that doesn't solve poverty.
I'm gonna ask a question.
Go ahead.
So you can econo evidence that you read, 90% of them are in coal. What does it say 2 seconds, sentences after?
Want to tell me?
Yeah, so it says that because renewables are cheaper, China has already shifted 50% of their investments from fossil fuels to renewable
Okay,
energy.
we'll debate this later. You guys taking prep for your rebuttal though?
Okay. Just gonna go straight down there. Start on their observation that the BRI is collapsing right now. If they don't win that there's a funding gap, or if they don't win that the BRI is going to lose all funding right now, then they don't have any offense coming from their case. Because if the BRI isn't collapsing, then they're going to keep investing in coal, and they're going to keep investing in infrastructure, causing emissions no matter what side you vote for. And I'm about to prove why that's true. The first reason is because right now, Oxford did a holistic analysis of every single BRI project in every single BRI nation, and then found that Chinese BRI investment has increased by 14% every single year since 2016, and by 2027 they're expected to have double the amount of investment that they have right now. That ultimately means that even if they do win that there's a small funding gap, we win that investment is increasing right now. That means in the long run, investment is going to keep going up until there is no funding gap, and it's going to mean inevitably that they're going to produce the infrastructure that they say is so bad. The second overall response is that their own author that says they have an 89% funding gap is from 4 years ago. Our evidence postdates that 4 years later, and specifically says that they've had 14% more funding every single year after that. And by 2027, they're going to have $1.3 trillion more in funding. They're going to complete the coal projects anyways. But then the other problem is that their own author that says 89% also tells you that even if the BRI EU does not join onto the BRI as it is would just be a scaled down version of what it would be if you vote for them. It would be slightly scaled down, but it doesn't just go away. All of the coal plants that they talk about are still going to exist even if they're at a smaller scale. But then the third overall response is that China can just recycle the cash that they're using in infrastructure. They can put the cash into infrastructure, and once they get the loans paid back to them, then they reinvest that money. There's no reason why they wouldn't be able to keep the BRI going. Then they tell you the EU is going to save the BRI by funding. There's 3 reasons why they wouldn't. Number 1, they already can. For example, Japan isn't part of the BRI and they still fund it. That's because they think it's an economically viable choice. But the EU, who isn't in the BRI as well, also doesn't fund it because they do not fund it like Japan does because they don't think it's an economically viable choice. And that doesn't change when you affirm. The mindset that it's a bad economic choice to invest into somebody who's been debt trapping and putting coal in countries isn't something that the EU is going to change just because they join onto the initiative. The big countries like Germany and France and Spain who control all the funding in the first place, they don't want to invest now, and they're not going to want to invest when you vote for them. Then on their contention one about coal, they tell you they're going to offload a lot of coal. But the first response is that they literally tell you right before that overall emissions in the world has been decreasing by 70% and investment in coal has been decreasing by 70%. If that's true, there's already 70 countries in the BRI, and even though they're investing in coal right now, overall the amount of coal has been decreasing, meaning obviously they aren't investing in as much coal as they tell you. The second response comes from Mahajan, who tells you that renewable energy, because of recent technological innovations, is now cheaper to build than coal and oil. That ultimately means that because it's cheaper to build, countries are going to pick the renewable energy over coal. That's empirically true. Nakano, their own evidence concludes that they've shifted 50% of their investment away from coal and towards renewables. The evidence that they cite that they're investing 90% into renewables comes from 2013 to 2016, but they say in 2019 they're only investing 40% into coal. Obviously, shift towards renewables is happening because renewables are way cheaper for China to invest in. The fourth response is that NARLA 17 finds that even if the BRI gets fully completed, and every single coal plant that they plan gets completed, it would only increase emissions by 0.5%, which she deems as negligible. The fifth response is that countries right now are on biomass. Biomass, for example, is things like trees, plants, and dead animals that they burn, and that emits 150% more than coal, 150% more CO2 than coal, meaning that even if they do build coal, that's comparatively better than what they have now. The other response that they tell you that they're going to lock countries into coal, but that obviously isn't going to happen when renewable energy is cheaper. Mahajan tells you that renewable energy has gotten so cheap that it's cheaper to destroy the coal-fired power plant and build a completely new renewable one than keep that coal plant going. They're not going to lock countries in. And the most important response is that if we win our contention too about the economy, then we also win their entire case. Because what Jacob 14 tells you is that when the economy increases from the BRI empirically, overall emissions have decreased by 0.1%. Their reasoning is because more efficient trade, better economy,
50 over.
you can focus better on environmental regulations.
Can I call the card before I take the bundle? So you said that the card that says it's getting cheaper.
Yeah.
Green card is getting cheaper.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. Okay, so
Just give me a second.
yep, we good. So it's 2 columns. Number 1, let's go cheaper. It should be like somewhere here. This is the most important part. If you read this, you know. Okay.
It's 11 seconds. He's alright. He's 21 seconds. We do a little bit more before our rebuttal.
That was 8 seconds more, so Alex.
So yeah, you used about 30 seconds.
Yes, sure. Judges, are you okay if I give you a brief off-time roadmap before I start? An off-time roadmap? Yeah. Okay. So I'm just going to be going down a couple of things that they mentioned in rebuttal in response to our case, then just down their piece. Alright, that being said, everyone ready? Yes. Time starts now. So let's start off on renewables being cheaper. We looked at their evidence. That just says that renewables in the US are being cheaper, not renewables globally. Insofar as their evidence goes, it's really skewed. But even if you buy that it works across the entire globe, you can turn it against them. Because if renewables are getting cheaper and China is consuming more domestically, it has every reason to offload coal at a cheaper price in the developing world. Because otherwise, the coal just functions as a sitting debt. You can turn this against them. But next, they try to go after Nakano and tell you that 2 sentences later, Nakano contradicts his own claim, saying that the BRI is actually shifting green. We literally have Nakano, you can read 2 sentences later, they're lying. But next, even if you buy the whole word about it getting cheaper, look to our in-scheme evidence, which tells you that countries get locked in. Even if coal gets cheaper, they don't have the opportunity to buy coal because their infrastructure is incapable of handling anything but coal. But next, let's go into funding, right? Because they try to tell you that investment is going up. But that doesn't actually prove that China has the funds to maintain this investment. If anything, I would simply contend China is burning through its limited money pool faster and faster and faster. Their contention only concedes to our thing about the BRI dying in the immediate future. But next, they try to go up here and tell you that like the EU doesn't think the BRI is a good investment. We give you Garcia Herrera, who tells you the EU would definitely come up and like co-finance the Belt and Road Initiative because it accelerates and furthers on existing investments the EU has in BRI states. Insofar as that goes, their contention does not interact with this warranting. But next, they try to tell you that on the impact of emissions, it's only going to be 0.5%. Again, that's non-interactive with our Higgs evidence, who tells you it is 3 degrees Celsius, which is far past the bright line of like 2 degrees Celsius, which is okay levels of global warming. But next, they also try to tell you that countries are going to switch to biomass. That's straight up false. They're not interacting with the top of our case, which comes from the Mardell evidence, telling you that countries were on a track to switch to renewables. Then China came in there with the Belt and Road Initiative and supplied them with coal instead. Mardell explicitly tells you no more Belt and Road, no more coal supply. They switch back to renewables, which is what the track they were on. Next, let's go into their case. Let's start off on health. First, they concede in cross that there aren't enough doctors to work in these hospitals along the Health Silk Road. At that point, you're just building buildings with medical equipment and there's no one working there. But secondly, McLaughlin of the Pulitzer Center explains that China supplies fake medicine in the developing world when engaged in health programs. That's really bad because they just inject water into people instead of giving them vaccines, which is not preventing disease. If anything, it is setting the medical systems of the developing world back and further back. Next, let's go into infrastructure. First, realize that Brown 16 explains that over half of infrastructure investments in China actually destroy economic value. There are 2 big reasons for this. First, projects are overinflated. There was a 31% overspend on 75% of BRI projects, which creates debt, a long-term economic problem that makes it harder for the EU to get itself out of further recessions, not just the imminent one, but next. 66% of projects have traffic shortfalls, meaning that the infrastructure doesn't generate enough revenue to pay for itself and just acts as sitting debt just sitting there. That's bad because, again, debt makes it really hard for the EU to stimulate its economy in times of recession. Next, look to Boccolina of Euronews in 2019, who explains literally 1 month ago that right now the EU is investing in its own infrastructure through the European Fund for Strategic Investment, EFSI, that has spent nearly 335 billion euros since 2015, creating 750,000 jobs, boosting EU GDP, and providing high-speed internet to 15 million households. This takes out their contention, because if the EU needs infrastructure, they're literally doing it right now. Our evidence tells you a month ago they're doing it. Next, let's go into overcapacity. There is a big problem here, because Jinhua Hua in 2019 tells you that China continues to apply structural changes to prevent overcapacity from getting worse. The fact of the matter is, China is internally solving for overcapacity, and you prefer this over their evidence, because their evidence simply says EU comes up there and co-finances and reduces the overcapacity, but never actually solves for the recession it would cause. And for all of those reasons, I urge the negation ballot.
Really quickly, can I see the 3 degrees?
Yeah, Higgs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're gonna do
Yeah, we're showing you next.
How much was that?
7 seconds. Alright, we're gonna do this right.
Alright.
How much time is that?
I think like
20, 25 seconds, something like that.
Alright, sounds good. Alright, before we start, Ross, you want first question?
Yeah. Okay, so you say the EU will fund the initiative.
Yes.
So what evidence do you read that says they would? I know you read evidence that says they have the capability to do
No,
it.
no. That's
Okay, so
actually not what we read.
We have the
At
evidence
all.
that you read too. The Garcia Herrero evidence doesn't say that they will fund it. It says that they have the capability to
No.
fund it.
Garcia Herrero evidence gives you really clear warning, explicitly telling you that the EU would co-finance the Belt and Road Initiative to accelerate existing investments that they already have in Southeast Asia and Africa. You're not responding to this.
wait.
You're just trying to.
So I can't really respond to something that's just blatantly false. We
I
have
mean,
the
neither
evidence
can I.
too.
We can go
I read-
circularly about this, but like insofar as the logic is on our side,
I'll
we'll
see
hear
the
it.
evidence after. You can
Go
take a
ahead.
question.
All right. So let's start off with like the fact that China is cutting down coal, right? So is China like cutting down production of coal, or is it just like not selling the coal?
I don't know. What's your question? What do you mean?
So you said that like China is like doing
I'm saying
less
that when
coal.
Chinese
so hold on.
investment into other countries has shifted 50% away from coal and towards
No, you
renewables.
said like you
That's
made a
what your
specific
other
response
economists
about
do.
like the quantity of coal going down. Is that the quantity of like coal China produces, or just like the quantity of coal China sells?
I'd say it's irrelevant either way.
No, it is really relevant. Give me an answer,
Okay.
and I'll explain it
I'm
based
sure
on
you
your
want to
answer.
tell me.
Okay, you know what? I'll actually tell you the relevancy right now. If it's just the amount of coal that like China sells, that's the overcapacity, meaning you're not solving for overcapacity.
Okay, so
But
obviously-
next, no. But next, if it's the amount of coal that China produces, you still don't get much ground there.
Okay, so even if we do concede the overcapacity argument and we do win that China's offloading more renewable energy every single year, that means like A, they're fine with operating with an
Wait,
overcapacity of
hold
coal
on,
and still
hold on.
shit. Can I finish? I let
Yeah,
you talk.
fine.
Even if you win that overcapacity exists, we win the argument that China's investment into other countries has shifted 50% away from coal and towards
No,
renewables.
no.
Okay, you
That's
let me
really-
finish. You cut me off at the exact same point.
Wait, I just
Okay,
want a question.
so
Are you
on
like
that-
citing our Nakano evidence again right here?
Okay, so you're Nakano.
Wait, yes or
evidence,
no?
it's
Yes or
on-
no?
Yes.
Okay, wait. You can have the judges read Nakano sometime. Like your thing about two sentences later is completely
It's
totally
not
false.
two
Take
sentences
Nakano.
later, it's like a paragraph later. It says in 2019, it's shifted, your evidence at the top says between 2013 and 2016, it was 90% investment between those 3 years. And it says in 2019, or either 2018 or 2019, it says it's only 40%. We'll show
Okay,
you
the
right
problem
now.
there is that like China has only promised to reduce
No,
investment.
it's not a
forecast
promise, it's
are
already
40%.
shifted.
No,
That's
it's
just so
forecast
false.
are
The
40%.
card
Is what
literally
China
says
is telling you.
40% of their investment is
You're
in coal
miscutting
right
this
now.
card really heavily, but you can have a question now.
Okay, I'm gonna read the card for my question.
No, can we ask a question instead?
Okay, yeah, you can take another question.
Okay, fine. So you try to go ahead and like read us this Oxford evidence saying that investment is going up by 14%. In what way does that correlate to the amount of money that China has? Because
Okay,
all you're giving us
the
is the
argument
argument
doesn't matter about how much money China has.
No,
has
it
to do
absolutely
with how-
does.
Okay.
It
Are you gonna let me explain what I'm trying to tell you, or are you
Yeah,
just gonna
sure.
tell me that it matters? Okay.
Yeah, sure.
So the argument, it doesn't matter how much China's investing into the initiative.
It
you're
really
saying-
does though.
Okay. I'm gonna finish this time, and you're not gonna talk. Okay. So what we say specifically is that yes, China has less money, but overall increase in investment from foreign investors and outside investors into the BRI has increased by 14%.
That's not the That's fine.
Like, can we see your Nakano card? Like,
Yeah.
maybe it's a different card, but like, ours doesn't say that.
Right. You can read the green.
Alright.
The green card?
Which green card? There are two.
There's two green cards on your card.
Oh, okay. We'll start prep now. That's 11 seconds. Oh wait, I might have hit you from.
I must have it too.
I'm too tired for this already.
You guys prepping?
Yeah.
Oh, can we see the Herrero evidence saying they will fund?
Yeah.
I'll pull it. It's highlighted in bold.
You can read the parts in between for context too.
So I want to see that they will fund, not that the logical source would be the EU.
Wait, it literally says they already fund.
Where can you show me what it says?
Okay, it's highlighted in bold. It said European banks are already the largest provider of loans. You guys gonna use the rest of your code? No. That was an extra like 30 numbers.
Wait, actually. Wait, so.
How much was that?
Like 7, 8 seconds probably. It was 8 seconds.
I'll start with some defense on their case. So I'm going to start on the neg. Is everyone good?
Hold on a second.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Everyone good? Start on their observation. If we win this, then we win their case. They say that when the EU joins, it's already funding. What's problematic is if their evidence says that the EU is already funding, then if they join, it's still going to be the same amount of funding. So either way, funding isn't the same in both worlds. At that point, they're losing their observation. A second response that's clean conceded out of Cameron's rebuttal is that overall, countries have to pay back China with the loans that they receive from these infrastructure projects. Which means they're getting more money in the long term, which means they can just refinance the money because they make a profit. Go on to their coal argument. Essentially, what we are going to tell you is that biomass is worse, 150% worse right now. The reasoning is simple. They burn trees that are carbon sinks, that is overall taking out carbon sinks like trees that are really good for the environment. At that point, it's 150% worse. Essentially, 50% of the developing world is on biomass. They're burning natural resources like trees. That's comparatively worse than coal. So even if they build coal, we would say on net, we're still solvency for the developing world and overall decreasing emissions. But then they're probably going to go for this argument about it's going to increase the temperature by 3 degrees Celsius. The problem with their evidence is it doesn't tell you when it's going to happen. We would say that if it does happen, it's going to happen sometime in like the next million years. Don't evaluate it. There's no time frame on their card. But go to our case. Because if we win our second contention on the EU economy, then we're winning their case. They clean concede the Wang, where the Jacob evidence tells you that when you increase trade connectivity and increase the efficiency of trade, it overall decreases the amount of emissions, and that's because they have to travel less space, and less time. That's really critical, because if we win our second contention, then we're winning also coal and also the EU economy. They give you a few responses. The first is that it's really bad. But the problem with that evidence is that it analyzes 50 years of Chinese investment. The BRI has only been in the initiative for 5 years, which means that even if 55% of them are bad, that overall means the investments before were really bad. But our evidence about the BRI right now is really good, which means that overall trade is increasing by 12%. The World Bank tells you that it decreases travel times by 9%, increasing trade up to 12%. That's why that is their second response, is that they're implementing their own infrastructure. The problem is the Brewster evidence indicates that 1/3 of European municipalities reported underinvestment. That's why we tell you when they join the BRI, A, they increase jobs, and B, they increase trade, with the World Bank evidence telling you that we'll lift 39 million people out of poverty. It's a clean vote for the affirmative.
Okay. And I see that the EU, like 1/3 under investment.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll just add like 5 minutes for every talk.
Well, I have it on Google Doc, so I'm gonna pop a hotspot real quick because I have it on Google Doc. But I'm not using the internet.
Yeah, for sure. It's all good.
By the way, we used 18 seconds of prep.
And we're pausing it until we can read their card.
Where are you guys right now in subject?
We have 48 seconds left.
Yeah.
Actually, we're just gonna, while they find scope.
Alright, so we used up 11 seconds, meaning we have 37 seconds left. Again, we'll show them once they have the card up.
Sorry, give me a second.
Yeah, no problem, no problem.
Okay, we're just gonna.
You just dropped
Well,
Drop
we have a card that's like sits, I think says the same thing, but I was trying to find the exact one. We have some. Give us like a minute to find it.
Okay, we'll wait. Looking for 1/3.
Yeah.
It's gonna be close.
Yeah, we'll just drop that for some. It's fine.
Okay, in that case, can I also see the card that you read in summary that says that now the projects do make a profit?
So I was indicting the card. I can explain it real quick.
Wait, no, we want it, like, in summary, you say that most of the projects
It's
do
the
make.
same. We have the same card. That's what we said.
Wait, can I just see what you guys read though?
Yeah, sure. That's fine.
Just show me the screen.
Because are we, just to be clear,
I'll show you the card.
are you talking about rounds? You said we have the same.
Yeah, I'll show you the card. I'll show you a card.
Yeah,
and
we
I'll explain to you
want
the
to
process.
Because we just want to see, you don't have to explain.
Dude, we just want to see what you're using in your summary.
This is the one you want.
This is what you guys use in summary, yeah?
Which one? Which one?
There's like
The one that
three
has
cards.
highlights on it.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Starting with one.
Okay, we used up
7 seconds.
Just 28 seconds left.
Okay. The order for this speech will be first on their case on economic growth, and then on our case on coal. Is everyone ready? Okay. Let's start time. Now, before you go into their economic impacts, recognize that they A, drop their health Silk Road argument, and B, they drop their overcapacity argument in summary. Don't let them weigh in final focus and bring up a new response. Let's go to their contention on economic growth. What Sarah comes up and tells you in rebuttal is that A, they overspend 31% of the time, and B, 66% of the projects don't even make the money back. They try and give you evidence that says that this isn't true. A, they don't have the card that they said that they did, and then B, the card that they did show us says that 82% of the investment is screened. I don't even know what that means. I hope they explain it in like Rand Cross. There's no way that they win that argument. This is really important because if 66% of the investments don't even make the money back, there's no ground for economic growth because 66% of them don't get economic growth. Let's go to our argument on climate change. First, they tell you that funding is non-unique because our Carrero evidence indicates that the EU is already financing. But the analysis that we give you is, yes, they are financing, but it's not enough because the Belt and Road Initiative is still dying. If the entire EU joins, that's going to accelerate funding because now the entire EU has joined. That's going to perpetuate climate change. Then they tell you investment is up. A, they can see that China doesn't have the money in cross. They just say they're burning it faster. If China's going to burn through it fast and run out of the money, there's no funding in the long term for the Belt and Road. Then B, they try and tell you that recycling funding will work. But first of all, recognize that China can't recycle money if 66% of it isn't even coming back because there's so much shortfall in the projects. There's no money to reinvest into the Belt and Road. Then they try and dispute our Nakano evidence. The evidence that they show us literally says 97% of the BRI goes into fossil fuels. You can basically vote for us right off of this because it allows us to link into 3 degrees of warming. They try and contest it by saying emissions only rise 0.5%. A, that's not contextualized. B, we literally give you the numbers. 3 degrees of climate change. They try and say that there's no time frame on it. Our evidence literally says if you allow the Belt and Road to continue for 30 more years, temperatures rise 3 degrees. That's an easy vote because a 0.5 degree rise in temperatures kills 153 million people. At the point where they don't even get access to recession because there's no economic growth for the EU to access from the BRI, and climate change worsens in the developing world, you're voting negation. You guys have been further across.
Yeah. So let's talk about the Brown evidence. This is the only piece of defense you extend on our second contention, correct? It is. So it says that in the last, so how long has the BRI existed?
You want to tell me?
Yeah, so it's existed since 2013. And how long has the Brown evidence analyzed its
Right, so I understand what you're going to come up here and say. You're going to say that it doesn't take into account the BRI because it looks like a larger frame of Chinese investments. So the problem with this is it historically analyzes how China invests, which continues and perpetuates under the BRI. The point they make is that generally when China invests, it's really unsafe, and the trend holds stable under the Belt and Road Initiative.
This is what I read in summary. Even if those 30 years prior before the BRI, those investments were bad, our World Bank evidence indicates that it's increasing trade by 12%, and that's really good economic.
This isn't responsive though, right? What the Brown evidence says, hold on, what the Brown evidence says has nothing to do with trade. It's saying infrastructure, 66% of the time, doesn't get money back. I would like to ask you what this
economic growth.
Okay, so the other problem.
Okay, wait,
real quick. Let me explain the other issue. The other response, the warrant for the card we show, which gives you the logical warranting, says that because the EU specifically, like yes, there might be negative growth in other countries, but the EU specifically has created a screening process where they have a panel of economists who looks at
the problem with the screening process is that your card doesn't say that it works. It just says they're going to start screening.
I can show you another one that says it works.
I mean, wait. Why are you going to bring up new evidence in final focus? The card that you guys use in all of your speeches doesn't prove anything because you don't contextualize it. You don't prove that it's true.
I'll explain it really clearly. Your evidence analyzes 50 years of Chinese investment.
No, we understand that, right? Yes, your counter evidence to it is not valid. It doesn't make any sense.
Insofar as you don't give us a better card to weigh on,
go ahead, you can finish.
It analyzes 50 years of Chinese investment, but the BRI has only been alive for 10 years. So what we are trying to say, what we are trying to say is that these 40 past years, maybe it was really bad economic growth, but right now the BRI is really good. It's increasing trade by 2%. That's good economic growth.
Okay,
but the
second, hold on. Can I like you've proven your point, right? And like you've already said this in summary. I wouldn't bring up anything new that's not allowed, right? 2 problems with this. First, you never showed me that anything has changed over the past 40 years. 2. Here's what doesn't make sense about screening. So, are you telling me that no other country has screened Chinese investment?
We're telling you that the EU is the only country that is developed enough has
Wait. So you're telling me that no other country that has ever done a Belt and Road has screened anything?
There probably have been quite a few that have screened.
So wait, then why
let's just move on.
Like,
No, are you guys conceding this?
Obviously,
No, you're
obviously,
conceding.
like,
You're
we're
conceding
not-
it if you don't want to.
If you're not going to
Obviously-
continue to debate it, you're conceding it. But that's fine, you conceded. Take
We're
a
not
question.
conceding.
Obviously,
Take a
like
question.
Kenya,
We're explaining-
Montenegro-
Take a question.
Okay, obviously, like Kenya and Montenegro don't have a screening.
I know, but
process.
Italy joined the BRI. You don't think they screened it? It didn't make money.
It did make money. That's why World Bank admits that they've increased trade by 12%. The analysis
Trade does not correlate to profits from infrastructure.
Trade
That doesn't make
economic
sense.
growth, which
Alright,
makes
that's
more
cross.
money, which is
That's the
profit.
end of cross.
We'll use prep.
How much you guys got left?
Oh, I think we have 45 seconds.
Their arguments are there, right? Just let them try to respond. Next arguments, we see what they're going with this, and they keep enforcing it so that the app can't respond. Which I guess could be strategy.
Okay.
They're both really good.
Starting on their case. The thing that goes conceded in their summary that means you literally cannot vote for them is the fact that the BRI overall has had 14% more funding every single year, and they're projected to have literally double the funding, $1.3 trillion more funding by 2027. That ultimately means that the BRI is not collapsing despite the amount, even if the amount of Chinese investment has been decreasing, other foreign investors have been increasing by 14%. It accounts for the evidence accounts for the drop in funding from China, but it also accounts for the increase in funding from other countries like the EU. And it says right now, the BRI is not collapsing. They've had more cash every single year. There's no reason to vote for them. But then on the environment, if you don't want to evaluate our case, you can vote for us on their case on coal. There's two reasons why that they basically concede. The first is that the Nakano evidence that they tell you says there's been 90% investment into coal. 2 paragraphs later says that it's only 40% investment into coal. Their evidence that says there's 90% was between 2013 and 2016. And it says that between 2018 and 2019, it was only 40% investment into coal. They've shifted 50% of their investment away from coal and oil and towards renewables in the past 3 years. The reasoning for this is pretty simple. Mahajan tells you it's cheaper to build renewable energy farms like solar panels and wind farms than it is to keep a coal-fired power plant running. That means the argument that they're locking countries into coal isn't happening, and they are building renewable energy. They've shifted 50% of all investment. Their case is a reason to vote for us, and this is a trend that's going to continue, meaning when you vote for us, you're solving global warming because China is offloading all of this renewable energy. You can literally call for the card. It says what I say it does. But then the overall most important response is that biomass is way, way worse than coal. What developing countries and the EU, what developing countries are using right now are things like dead trees, dead plants that they've chopped down, and they're burning those for energy. That's 150% worse than coal, meaning even if they do when that coal gets implemented, it's better than biomass. But then on our case, we tell you what FDR did with the New Deal during the Great Depression to pull the US out of depression was to invest in infrastructure, and to invest to create jobs and to increase the amount of trade. That's obviously going to pull us out of recession, to create millions of jobs. It's very clean. Their evidence doesn't account for the screening process. Obviously, the screening process isn't, the panel of economists is not going to take in bad investment. That's what the evidence concludes.
All right, we have 37 seconds left starting now.
Alright, that's time. Okay, so the order of things is going to be screening, 14% more funding, Nakano, biomass, then your like whole FDR analysis that's at the very end of your focus. That being said, everyone ready? Time starts now. So they start off with screening. What they don't actually go over is the analysis that Alex brings up in Grand Cross and additionally in his summary speech. The fact of the matter is other countries screen, they admit to this, and this trend of the BRI being inherently harmful for those countries still holds true. The fact is, in these past 30 years of Chinese investment, Brown finds that there's a 31% overspend on 75% of projects, and 66% of projects generate traffic shortfalls, meaning they don't don't pay back for themselves. At that point, the BRI is a deal in which only China benefits, and the EU doesn't break even, doesn't reap any of the benefits of the infrastructure that China would build. They concede this, they don't respond to it. Next, they try to tell you that there is 14% more funding in the BRI every year. Again, that's not what they actually said. Their evidence says that there's a 14% increase in spending of the BRI, and that is non-responsive to the logic that both Alex and I bring up, telling you that China is just burning through the limited funds that they have faster and faster and faster. At that point, you have to recognize that our Garcia-Herrero evidence means that the EU is going to join and save China from this destructive trend. Next, they try to indict our Nakano evidence, which tells you that 90% of BRI investment goes in coal and 10% goes in renewables, by telling you that it only analyzes from 2013 to 2018. That's literally false. They picked that time frame from the next sentence over. You can look at the card, that's false, but next they try to tell you that from 2018 to 2019, the trend shifted. We called their card, it's about Pakistan only. That's one example. But next, let's go into biomass, right, where they clean drop the Mardell evidence, telling you that the moment the BRI dies and there's no more coal, that there's no more China to supply coal, that means that the country switched back to renewable energy, not the biomass that they talk about in the status quo. At that point, you don't give them any ground on their case, and instead, you look to ours, in which our Higgs evidence tells you that global temperatures as a result of the BRI go up 3%. And again, our Yale evidence tells you that a 0.5 degree increase, our Prokata evidence tells you a 0.5 degree increase in global temperatures kills 153 million people. Do the math, that's a lot of lives. Thus, vote nay.